But just to start with a couple of questions from me. Most overrated issue in investing. Let's start with the thing that you think people make way too much out of that at the end of the day doesn't matter a lot. What is the question you get again and again and kind of go, what? Doesn't really matter.
Is small cap value, can we include that in there? But if we weren't going to go down that road, I'd say rebalancing by the financial industry. A lot of advisors say, well, we rebalance your portfolio and therefore we earn an extra 2% annualized return by doing it, which is nonsense. So I'd say that rebalancing is kind of overrated.
Adam yesterday touched on this. I have an analogy that I often use about asset allocation. If you've ever baked a cake before, then you know that you start with basically some dry white powdery stuff, right? Flour, sugar, salt, leavening, and some butter and eggs. And then when you mix them together in exactly the right proportions, cook it at exactly the right temperature for exactly the right length of time, magic happens, right? You go from butter, eggs, and powdery stuff to a cake. But if you mess it up, if you get the proportions wrong, the temperature wrong, you leave out the leavening, whatever, it's a disaster. And a lot of people will tell you that asset allocation is the same way, right? If you get the small cap value tilt exactly right, if you use REITs, a 10% REIT allocation, or you make sure to use small short-term treasury bonds instead of a total bond fund, or whatever it is. But asset allocation is not like baking a cake. It's like making a fruit salad, right? If you just increase your blueberry allocation a little bit, it's not a big deal. Like nothing, there's no magic, it's no disaster, you just have more blueberries. And that might be good or it might be bad, but it's not a big deal. And if you go to the grocery store and the raspberries and blackberries look kind of iffy, and so you end up with a 3-ingredient fruit salad, that's fine.
I'm going to say is this on? Yeah, I'm going to say I actually agree with Rick. When to rebalance. And looking at history, you could see a whole lots of reasons when to do it, but I think as long as you rebalance, as long as you buy when stocks are on sale and sell when they're high, you're going to get a boost of a return versus that average asset allocation.
Yeah, I'm severely disadvantaged here 2 ways. Number one is I'm the last to answer, so I agree with all 3 of these guys. And the second thing I've learned is to never match similes with Mike Piper. So
We start on that side and go this way.
Yeah. So Bill, this one's coming right at you. You are all intelligent and great money managers. How do you treat yourself or blow money? Is it a trip, car, knowing you have plenty of money? What is it? What's your splurge?
I just paid $100 extra to fly business class back to Portland, and that's a first. That's almost as good as the threads you see on the board. Which can I buy my Rolex now? Am I will I go to hell if I buy a Rolex to Boglehead hell?
Do you pay for first class if you're going overseas?
That's a really good question. I haven't really faced that. We fly Iceland Air, and you can bib on first class, and sometimes I win and sometimes I lose.
I have a dysfunctional relationship with money. And I even wrote about this. As an Uber saver, it's hard to start spending money. And I've done a little research on that, and I'm very proud. We flew premium economy to Europe. It spent 2 weeks there, and it cost $20,000, and it's the first time I bragged about how much something cost. I'm usually bragging about the $1 tram ride from the airport to the hotel.
Take a quick trip to Colorado Springs, have breakfast with Allan Roth, and then spend a little bit of time climbing.
So how do I splurge on money? Well,
On yourself. What do you
I
do?
have a wife. We did go to Europe and last year, and of course I was all about the economy class, even though I was going to be in the middle in row 87 and she was going to be in the middle in row 76. She said, "We're flying business class or I'm not going." So we flew business class, which was great, by the way. And so we'll probably do that. In fact, I know we're going to do that if I ever want to go to Europe again. We're going to be flying. But the second thing that I do for myself is I buy really expensive pickleball paddles.
How much do they run? A really good one.
$250.
Here's a question. I've heard that many people who win the lottery lose it pretty quickly. Why is that? What is the best thing to do if you get a sudden windfall like that? Bill, how about you?
Well, there's actually, I think that's urban folklore. I think there is now accumulating peer-reviewed literature that says that people who win the lottery actually don't do badly. Obviously, some are going to, but they don't. They certainly that the peer-reviewed literature doesn't really support that, which is too bad. I mean, it's a great morality play to believe the urban folklore.
I don't know how they would get that data. I've heard other statistics that 25% of men on Match.com are married, but I don't know how you get that data. I've got some professional athletes as clients who, earned a lot of money, and they're not the norm. They're not the ones that typically blow it all immediately. I think it's very hard to convince somebody that has always spent to start saving. Catching up on F.I.R.E is a wonderful tool.
Mike, here's a question for you. Are reverse rollovers of IRA to 401k recommended? And maybe you can talk about what situations that might be appropriate.
Sure. Number one would be if we are looking to do a backdoor Roth. So if you have income that is too high to make regular Roth IRA contributions, and you can then contribute to a non-deductible traditional IRA, you can make that contribution. But if you then do a conversion, that's why we call it a backdoor Roth, is that you would convert it immediately. But if you do that, when you have other traditional IRA balances, then you're going to have to pay tax on most of that conversion anyway. So what we could do is take your existing traditional IRA balances, roll them into your 401k, and then the new contribution, you have to wait a year, but the new contribution to the traditional IRA, the non-deductible contribution, then that's the only money there, so we can convert it right away, not have to pay tax. So that would be one reason. There could be potentially other reasons. You get creditor protection in a 401k that might not exist in an IRA, it depends at the state level. There could be better investment options in your 401k. Every once in a while, you do actually see some things that don't exist. That's kind of backwards of what is usually the case, but sometimes. So there are some reasons. It's not something that you do usually, but yes.
I do want to just pick up on something Mike said, and that is creditor protection. And this is state by state. There are some states where you have just the same creditor protection in your IRAs and Roth that you do in your qualified plan, like a 401k or 403b, where creditors cannot attach to it. So there are a lot of states that you get the same creditor protection, but there are some states that you're in, and if you have money in an IRA, they might give you maybe the first 50 or 60,000 of that you can keep, and the rest of it is open to creditors. So it depends on which state you live in. There's a website that I go to. I don't know how updated it is, but I look at it, and it's just a creditor protection by state website, and you could look and see your particular state. I mean, there are some states that are horrible. I mean, I don't think I'd have any money in an IRA, but there are some states where it doesn't matter whether you have it in the IRA or the 401k. So you really got to look into that for your state.
It depends on a lot of things, but if I had access to the government thrift savings plan, boy, would I roll my IRAs into that incredibly good 401k type of savings plan.
Rick, just a quick follow-up for you on that earlier point about rebalancing being overrated. The question is, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I was talking basically about the financial advisor community who is looking for a reason to collect fees, We charge you 1%. And what do you do for that? Well, we come up with the optimal portfolio, which of course is impossible to do. And then we're also going to rebalance your portfolio frequently because they show you some chart that shows if you rebalance every quarter that you're going to get some sort of an excess return, and it's really inflated. So as I think Allan said it correctly. He said basically, when the market's down, you probably want to rebalance, and when the market's way up, you probably want to rebalance. However, I'll caveat that with, if you're going to have to sell stock in a taxable account and you have no place, and you're going to have to take a gain because all of your retirement money is in bonds already, and your Roth money, you don't want to sell stock because, that's going to go to the kids. You want it to grow tax-free. So now you're left with, well, in order to keep my allocation 60-40 between stocks and bonds, I have to sell stock in my taxable account, and it's going to generate gains. My answer would be, just do what's called a reverse glide path. Don't worry about selling stock in your taxable account, unless you can do it at a very low tax rate. Maybe, Allan, you want to comment on that.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving pieces here, and Rick just touched on one of them, namely that you certainly don't want to be doing rebalancing selling in a taxable account. That would completely more than wipe out by an order of magnitude any rebalancing bonus. And of course, it's a risky process as well. There are places, there are asset class pairs that you certainly wouldn't want to be rebalancing, US versus Japanese stocks, for example, for the past 40 years. I think that the benefit of rebalancing is not financial, it's psychological. It gets you used to buying low and selling high. It keeps you in financial condition, and I put that in quotes, the condition being that it basically builds up your discipline. It's a muscle that you need to be using from time to time to be able to act properly.
I've got a bit of a differing opinion. Asset allocation comes first. Asset location comes second. So if you're out of your investment policy and you have no room to sell stocks in the tax-deferred or tax-free accounts, don't let the taxes wag your asset allocation. Go ahead and pay the taxes. Now, use common sense. If today it's a short-term gain and tomorrow it's a long-term gain, I'd wait that day. But it's just like you don't move somewhere because there's no state tax. You don't pick an asset allocation to minimize the taxes. You want to maximize the probability that you can do what you want for the rest of your lives.
So here's a question I'd like each of you to tackle. What has been your biggest change of heart since you first started investing? Rick, let's start with you.
Are we talking like way back when I bought dolly prints that were fake? I'd say, okay, let's move forward then. or buying that timeshare that I had to give up. No. Okay. My biggest change of heart has been moving from complexity to simplicity in a portfolio. I listened to John Bogle. I had the epiphany of indexing back in 1996. I fell in love with the idea that it was great. But then I got kind of overly wrapped up in the slicing and dicing of it all. And, we could have, again, small cap value. We could have international small cap value. Let's split Europe and Pacific. And, it got to be this indexing was all indexing, but it got to be an overly complex portfolio. And then I had a second epiphany, which I call simplicity, which means, getting back to Jack Bogle, he was right. And the 3-fund portfolio works. And you really don't need much more. And so my second epiphany with this was simplicity.
Similar answer in that I think that's kind of a normal progression for a Boglehead, is that you get into it, especially if it's a Boglehead who's hanging out on the forum, you can't help. You're bombarded with this information about I could do this or I could do that. And so you kind of dig into it a little bit, and it looks promising, and which is not to say that any of these various things you could do with your asset allocation are a bad idea, but recognizing that this is not the most important thing, and investing, we can keep it simple and That's beneficial because it makes us less likely to make investing mistakes, but it's also beneficial because it frees up our time to, just deal with any other thing you want to do in your life, but also just within the financial planning picture, right? Like, you can keep the investing part simple. The tax part's never going to be that simple. Estate planning's not necessarily going to be very simple. So if you can keep one piece of it simple and that frees up your time and energy to tackle all the other parts, that's great.
I've changed my view on safe spin rates. A bit of a pessimist, I would say 25, 30-year safe spin rate a few years ago was about 3% increasing with inflation. I even wrote a piece why I disagreed with Morningstar's safe spin rates study. And 2 conferences ago, I apologize because I no longer disagree. Suddenly, real interest rates shot up from -1% to over 2%. And that changed everything dramatically. And I agree with Morningstar's safe spin rates.
Yeah, 2 things that I've changed my mind about. One is a long-term concept, which is thinking about the riskiness of stocks. And I've come to realize over the decades that that's the wrong question unless you ask for whom. All right. If you're a young person, stocks aren't all that risky because you're deploying a constant stream of savings, and eventually you're going to hit the jackpot. In terms of buying low. The second thing I've been turned around about, and I really owe this to Jim Dolly. I used to think that real estate investing was 3 Mile Island toxic. You should stay away from it. It wasn't an investment. It was a job. And I like to say that if you liked dealing with fixing toilets and drug-addled tenants, then go for it. But Jim did turn me around on that a little bit. So if you know what you're doing for a small subset of people, it's probably an appropriate activity, maybe 5 or 10% of people. I got a very interesting email from someone who was actually going to become a finance professional. And he thanked me for writing my books and convincing him that there was no way in the world he was going to be able to successfully pick stocks because he was competing against people with, vast databases, IQs of 160 who are working 90 hours a week. But it was possible to make a good living dealing in real estate because there he was dealing with dentists from Lubbock. And so he knew who was on the other side of his trades and he could pick those trades. I thought that was a fairly profound observation.
Mike, here's a question for you. Can you please talk about mega backdoor IRA conversions? We just found out my husband's 401k plan allows these. I guess an after-tax 401k, but it was never advertised as a benefit. Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, so the mega backdoor Roth is the backdoor Roth that happens in a 401k instead of an IRA. So we have with a 401k, we've got our regular deferrals, right, which you can make as pre-tax or Roth, and that's up to you. And then catch-up contributions, potentially, depending on your age. And then there's another type of contribution that the tax law allows you to make that your plan might allow you to make or might not allow you to make. And just like the person who wrote in with this question said, they don't often advertise it. In many cases, you are allowed to make this type of contribution, but they just don't tell you. And this is called an after-tax contribution. And so it's after-tax because you don't get a deduction for it. So it's a non-deductible contribution to your 401k. And the contribution limit is much higher. I never memorize any of the limits.
65,000, I think, all in. Okay.
Thank you. So much higher contribution limit than the regular, even including catch-up. And so you can put all this money in, you don't get a deduction for it, but the mega backdoor Roth part of it is that then you're allowed to convert it immediately if your plan allows for one of 2 things. Number 1 is an in-plan conversion, which means that immediately after putting that after-tax non-deductible money in, you move it right over into the Roth 401k side of the plan. And it's not taxable. So you basically just got to make a enormous Roth 401k contribution way beyond the normal limit with no downside particularly. The other thing so sometimes the plan doesn't allow for that, but it will allow for you to roll that portion and only that portion over into a Roth IRA. So sometimes that's allowed, and it just depends on your plan document. And so the idea is you're just able to make much larger Roth contributions through a 401k than you would normally be able to.
So a 401k, you can contribute currently, the total amount that can go into a 401k is $69,000, and if you're over the age of 50, I believe it's $76,000. Okay. So you're putting, if you're under the age of 50, you're putting your $23,000 in as an employee, and then there's this bucket that's left that goes all the way up to 69. However, if your employer is putting money in, that uses up some of that bucket. So what's left, if you're able, is the amount that you could do this mega backdoor Roth. I'll also say that if you're self-employed, you can do this with a solo 401k, but you need a special type of solo 401k, and Harry Sitt wrote a fantastic article that I refer to all the time. You can look it up, Harry Sitt, solo 401k, mega backdoor Roth, Google that, where he talks about as a solo self-employed, if you open up a solo 401k with a kind of a custom firm, you could also do this mega backdoor Roth. But generally, if you're just doing a prototype plan with like Accenture or Fidelity or Schwab, you can't do it. So it takes a custom plan.
It's one of those laws that's too good to be true, but it is true. If you have that option, seriously look at it.
I have a question, actually, that I'd like to direct to the three of you about this, because this really is my area of expertise, which is to the extent that you want to prioritize charitable giving and you are worried about long-term care expenses, should you be careful about Rothifying too much? In other words, concerned about using up all of your traditional IRAs, which you can basically pass tax-free to whatever charities you want at death, or to be able to use your traditional IRAs that you're going to get at least a partial deduction for if your long-term care expenses are high.
Well, the mega backdoor Roth is using after-tax dollars to convert to pre-tax, convert to tax-free dollars. I think that's hard to go wrong. Could the government come up with laws to prove me wrong? Absolutely.
Well, Bill, as far as I'm understanding your point, though, is the long-term care costs are oftentimes quite deductible, and so the traditional IRA can be a really elegant or traditional pre-tax account can be an elegant asset to use to address those expenses. Is that what you're thinking about?
Precisely, and that goes double for charitable giving. If you give money out of your traditional IRA, that money has never gotten taxed at any point.
Yeah.
Whereas if you Rothify, you've paid taxes on it.
With the charitable giving side of things, yes, it is very helpful to maintain, if you have charitable intent, to maintain some traditional IRA dollars, because charitable giving basically lets you turn a traditional IRA into an HSA in the sense that you got a deduction when the money went in, it grows tax-free, and then it comes out tax-free also. So that's a fantastic deal. And so yeah, if you have charitable intent, eliminating your tax-deferred balances is not a good idea. Save some money for that purpose. I think it's a little different for the long-term care side of things. The long-term care costs, if they are deductible, then yes, in those years that can be bringing your taxable income down and letting you pull the money out of the traditional IRA at perhaps not a very high tax rate. But I struggle with explaining this. The deduction you get, it's fungible in the way that the money is fungible. You're going to get that deduction even if you aren't pulling the money out of traditional, like the deduction is because of the healthcare expense, not because you're taking money out of the traditional IRA. And so that deduction would be available to save money on other things, regardless of where the money's coming from. So I think saving money in a traditional IRA or other tax-deferred place for charitable giving down the line makes a lot of sense. I don't think that's the case for the long-term care thing, although it is true that if you are going to be having significantly deductible long-term care expenses, yes, that is going to be some tax savings.
But I agree with you, Bill. Tax diversification is important, having some taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-free, because we never know what life brings us, and we really never know what politicians are going to bring us.
Here's a question just following up on long-term care. What is a basic strategy for financing long-term care? So assuming someone doesn't have insurance and they're setting aside funds presumably for long-term care, where, how invested, maybe even how large? Can you all talk about that?
Well, we guys don't live very long in long-term care. Women, you've got the bigger problem. You live a lot longer. With most of my clients and for myself, we self-insure. I think if you don't have much in the way of savings, you're probably going to be in a Medicaid place. It's somewhere in between. You can buy long-term care insurance, but a temporary policy or pure long-term care, rates have increased incredibly, and that's just too much risk in my opinion. And a permanent long-term care policy is mixed with a permanent insurance, whether it's whole life or universal or something like that, is very expensive. My clients tend to be very wealthy, so we self-insure.
You also have your home. Generally, the first person who goes into, if they have to go into assisted living or nursing home, a lot of that could be self-funded, at least from a lot of the people who might have a couple of million or more. You self-fund that portion of it. But you do have your home. You have the equity in your home. By this time, a lot of homes are paid off. So you could do a reverse mortgage. Shh. I don't know if we got a chance to talk that much about it, but they actually are useful for some people because you don't have to sell the home, and therefore the equity in the home, if both spouses die, gets a step up on death. So you could borrow from the house to fund the long-term care for one spouse or the other if needed. So that's another option you have. Or you could sell the house, take the gain. You got $500,000 in gain for if it's two people filing jointly, $250,000 if it's a single person, after 2 years of death of the spouse. So, I mean, you have the equity in the home that can be used towards long-term care, and I think a lot of people use their home or could use their home as a long-term care insurance policy, the equity in the home.
Yeah, the people who bought it 20 years ago probably got a pretty good deal before the insurance companies figured out how to price it properly. But I think in 2024, if you need it, you can't afford it, and if you can afford it, you don't need it.
It sounded to me, and maybe I was wrong, but maybe a part of that question was about if we are self-funding and setting aside either mentally or literally a part of the portfolio for potential future long-term care costs, how do we allocate it? And to me, that is a question that I think it can be helpful to mentally set aside this money in the sense that we don't want to count on using it for other spending. But as far as asset allocation, I don't think there's a particularly useful way to say, oh, this money should be allocated that way, because we don't know when it's going to happen. If we knew when it would happen, then we could pick some asset allocation that's a perfect match, or tips that mature in exactly that year or whatever, but we don't know. So I don't think there's a need to segregate it out from an asset allocation point of view.
And by the way, often if the second spouse goes into long-term care, it's very expensive, but you no longer have a house, you no longer have a car, insurance, traveling. So there are some expenses that offset that.
I have a question for whoever wants to jump on it that's related. I have heard from other financial planners that when clients don't have any sort of long-term care insurance, that sometimes those are the ones who dramatically underspend what they could spend because they are very nervous about these potential costs hanging out there. What do you think about that? That, even though the sort of the financing aspects of insurance aren't great, that there's a kind of a peace of mind allocation there that could help someone live well in those years that they're well.
Well, there's two sides of that. You've got a very expensive premium that could be going up, which might cause you to spend less as well. But it's like any insurance. The insurance company expects to make money from it. So your expected return is negative. Absolutely, if it makes you feel better, allows you to spend more, then yes, you should do it, even though it may not be economically optimal.
I will say for the young people in this room, okay, when you get to our age, well, not Mike, just have a lot of children, right? I mean, one of them will take you in.
Speaking of children, this question says, my son selected T. Rowe Price High Yield Bond Fund in his 401k. He is 29 years old, so now he has 90% stock, Vanguard 500, and 10% junk bonds. Please give info of pros and cons of high yield bond funds, junk bonds.
You know, I did a talk on the language of investing, and the one term my industry got right are calling high yield bonds junk bonds. Don't buy junk, take your risks with stocks, have your fixed income be the most boring part of your portfolio.
And I'll give you the other side of that. Okay, so it is part of the bond market, right? High yield. Vanguard has a wonderful high yield corporate bond fund. It's not C-rated, double C-rated. It's double B, B double B. And if you look at the risk and return of that portfolio, it has actually done very well relative to the risk. Now, granted, Allan is right. It does have higher correlation with economic risk. So it does go down more than, say, a treasury bond fund when the economy goes down. But if you're going to have this portfolio, if you're going to add high yield bonds to your portfolio, I think that Vanguard has probably one of the best high yield corporate bond funds out there. And there is a little bit of an inefficiency in where they're investing in the market because they're buying B-rated, double B-rated. And so when something becomes a fallen angel and it drops from investment grade, which is triple B, down to double B, you've got a much bigger pot of people, a pot of portfolio managers who have to sell that bond. So you get an awful lot of selling going on. And so it depresses the price. Vanguard is buying double B rated bonds. They pick this bond up, and I think they actually get a premium for liquidity for being able to buy these bonds when that happens. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think that fund has done well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're arguing, angels on pinheads here. Is how much extra juice do you get from the equity risk premium you're actually getting from junk bonds versus you would actually getting from junk bonds? I mean, I used to play that game. I used to wait for the spread to increase to 10 or 15%, and then I would load up on junk bonds until I realized I would have done a whole lot better investing in stocks at that point.
Okay, we are right on time here. I think we are going to do this kind of Ask Us Anything session at future conferences. I've loved this. We have a huge stack of things that we could have gotten to and didn't have time. So many great questions. We are going to have to leave it there. Please join me in thanking Rick, Mike, Allan, and Bill.
And Christine.